righty. Morning, y'all.
Good morning.
Morning.
Is doing well.
Good. Had a great wing fling last night because this is Thursday when we're filming this.
We sure did. It was very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'm best wham of the year.
Mm-hmm.
It was very nice. It was
Yeah.
tasty. I like it. We have another cook-off in a few weeks, and that's the mac and cheese cook-off.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to throw my hat in for that one.
It'll be fun.
Search through the family recipes. But anyway, so what stories do we have today, Pastor Eric?
We have two stories, like always. Our Old Testament story is, again, it's not just a little story. It's a big idea, the big event, split of the kingdom. So we're not going to really read a particular story. Pastor Rebecca's going to, I think you're going to tell us about it if that's good. And then our second story, we'll get our second story in a second. What's this business about the split of the kingdom? What's that?
Yeah.
We can't nice, can we?
Yeah, well, so up until this point, the people, they came out of Egypt, they settled in the land of Israel. It was one big kingdom. And if you've been following along, you heard us talk about David, you've heard us talk about Solomon, the kings over the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of God's people. So of course, Solomon, after ruling many years, Solomon dies. He's the one who built the temple, like we talked about last week. He dies. And after his death, there's this change in power. And it sort of happens, it's kind of like in the middle times, in the transition times. This is when things can be a little shaky. And that was the case for the people of Israel, is that after they'd had this time of Solomon ruling, after his death, things got shaky and there was some disagreement over who would rule the people. And there were some other issues too, but what happened is, after this disagreement between the people, they split into the northern kingdom, which from here on out gets known as Israel, and about 10 tribes of the people of Israel, 10 of the tribes go north. I believe it's the 10 tribes. I hope I don't have that backward. But many of the tribes go north into the northern kingdom, and then the kingdoms in the south, or the tribes in the south, they go to the southern kingdom with Jerusalem as their capital, and they become known from here on out as Judah. So this one kingdom that was one, it gets split in north and south, and you have Israel and Judah. And it's sad because they used to be one kingdom all together, and because of this shakiness, because of this disagreement, they split in two. And I think you might argue, they're not as strong when they're split. They're not as united anymore. And it's sad to see that these people are God's people, but they're not together anymore. And so then the narrative through the Old Testament is, what's going to happen to these people now that the kingdom has split? What is going to happen now that they're not united? What happens next?
That's right. It is that story, PR, about being broken over and over and over. It seems like everything in the Old Testament, and maybe New Testament, and maybe really our lives, are trying to put back together what is broken. So right now, this is split north and south, and they don't have that king, that strong king to lead them, and it's just broken, and it's a little mushy right now. It's not particularly, it's not certain at all, and it does make everybody a bit weaker.
And some of the kings do a good job of following what God says, and some of the kings don't. And we'll see that when they don't follow what God says, there's things that happen to those kingdoms as well. Yeah. And that's where we get the prophets coming in and telling us things. But I guess that's something to keep in mind from here on out, is the kingdom's broken. And so what do we do with a broken kingdom? What does
Put it
God
back together, like Humpty Dumpty.
Can we on our own?
We are, but that's our goal. And yeah. I think we'll find out, spoiler alert, that we can't do it by ourselves. That's why we are seeking God. And God, I think, knows that, because God always welcomes the people back after they've broken things up. So this story, the story that Pastor Rebecca told, is written in 1 Kings chapter 11. So That's where the full story is. Now, our second story is also not a parable, or it's not a little, it's like Zacchaeus last week. It's not a little story. It's again about an idea. But I'm gonna actually read this from Matthew, and this is this week's idea or story is about sheep and goats. This is written in Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, and I'm going to read verses 31 to 46. Okay. And let's see if we can make sense of this, because this is the grown-up Bible. We'll see if we can help the boys and girls understand.
Our kids are
When
smart.
the Son comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick, and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?" And he will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. All right. What do we think? Suddenly a goat's not such a good thing to be, is it?
Mm, Suddenly it's a little scary.
You got that Jesus sort of talking about this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a little bit like the story Pastor Rebecca read a minute ago. It goes from something whole to this and that.
Yeah.
It goes to people here who are doing good and not doing good. So what do we make of this story? What are we supposed to learn from this?
I think I see, like you see throughout the Gospels, this call to care for those that are powerless or vulnerable in society.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think so.
I think
Yeah.
whenever I read this and thinking about preaching, the first thing I think is what is going to jump to people's minds first. And I think where people might sit with this is, oh gosh, where am I? And it can create a sense of, am I going to do enough to be one of the sheep? So I can see people sitting with this with a bit of discomfort. And so then the thing to talk about and question and wrestle with is, what do we do with that fear that what if we're not enough? And that can turn us in, because then we start thinking about our own selves and where we land, and not think about what Daniel says, like caring for the other. And so how can this be a text that unites us when it could also make us scared and wonder where we are?
I said earlier, this is not a parable, but it is a parable. It's just not, it's one of those parables that makes us also feel uncomfortable. It's a story that with a broad meaning, and maybe it's about caring for others, Um, what else may Jesus be trying to teach in this story?
Mm. I think the separation, because we just talked about it, the person who's vulnerable, the separation in our world today is us and them. And I think Jesus is trying to close a gap between those who have and those who don't have, those who have power and those who are vulnerable. And that's closing a gap in a way.
The other part about this we have to think, be careful is we in our Lutheran tradition, we don't teach that these works, these good things will save us, that God did that for us through Jesus. So we don't want to feel like we have to do good things in order to be saved. Why do we do these things? Well, maybe because we were commanded, because we're thankful. And so for boys and girls who are listening, it might be, well, what does this mean for me? Well, it might mean like the other day in the Children of God moment when Pastor Rebecca said, how can you let your light shine in the world? Or even last night in my reflection for Wham, Jesus. So the law says if we follow the law, we have light. We walk in light, not darkness. But more importantly, if we follow Jesus, we are in the light. So it's about receiving the gospel, the good news. So, I think that's the question for the boys and girls. How can they shine their light, or how can they be a sheep and not a goat?
How can they bring people together? That might be the way to do it. How can they bring people together instead of cause separation?
Could be very good. All right, 2 more stories down. So next week we're going to talk about the Northern Kingdom, its prophets and fate. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to do 2 weeks after that about the Southern Kingdom, and then for the New Testament we're going to talk about the parable of the vineyard. Wow, that's a good one. All righty. All right, everybody. I hope y'all have a great week.
All right.
Hello, everybody.
All right. Bye now.